All right, welcome to this explainer. Think of this as your ultimate, highly structured study guide designed to decode the 11th century theology of St. Anselm's ontological argument so you can absolutely ace your exam. Whether you're encountering this for the first time or just cramming for a final, we are going to break down this fascinating piece of philosophical reasoning step by step. Okay, here is our blueprint for today. First, the philosophical toolkit. Second, Proslogian 2, defining God. Third, the painter and the fool. Fourth, Proslogian 3, necessary existence. And finally, the perfect island objection. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and getting this structure right is key to mastering the topic. Let's jump right into section 1, the philosophical toolkit, equipping you for the exam. Okay, so before we can even begin to solve Anselm's puzzle, we absolutely have to master the terminology that forms the foundation of his deductive proof. Honestly, examiners love testing these terms, so let's lock them in right now. First up is a priori. Anselm's argument is fundamentally a priori. What does that mean? It means he's aiming for a universal proof without needing to observe the natural world, right? He's not looking at trees or stars to prove God exists. He relies purely on reason and logic, completely independent of physical experience. And this perfectly illustrates why it's a deductive proof. In a deductive argument, if you accept the premises, the conclusion, in this case God's existence, logically must follow. It's not about gathering evidence and making a best guess. That would be inductive. No, this is about setting up absolutely ironclad definitions that lead to an unavoidable conclusion. Building on that idea, Anselm argues that saying God exists is what we call an analytic statement. This means his existence is woven directly into the very definition of the word. Think of it like saying a triangle has 3 sides. You don't need to go out and physically check every single triangle to know that's true, right? It's true by definition. Well, Anselm is trying to show us that God's existence works the exact same way. Finally, definitely remember the word contingent, because Anselm is going to heavily contrast our contingent universe against a God who relies on absolutely nothing else to exist. You, me, the earth, we are all contingent. We depend on other things to be here. Hold on to that concept because it's going to become totally crucial in the second half of his argument. Moving right along to section 2, Proslogion 2, defining God. So let's see how our new toolkit actually builds the first stage of Anselm's reasoning. This is found in chapter 2 of his 1078 book, Proslogion. By the way, fun fact, Anselm didn't actually call this the ontological argument. That name was slapped on by Immanuel Kant centuries later. Anyway, Anselm's core definition of God is this: that than which nothing greater can be conceived. He claims everyone, believer, non-believer, whoever, inherently understands God as this supreme, ultimate being possessing all perfections. Listen, if you're going to memorize just one single sentence for your exam, make it this one. It's literally the engine that drives the entire argument. Now, he attempts to prove this using a technique called reductio ad absurdum. Basically, he wants to show that stating God does not exist results in a massive logical contradiction. It's a totally classic philosophical maneuver. He wants to take the atheist's claim that God is just an idea and stretch it until it breaks, proving that denying God's existence is, well, literally absurd. Okay, if you are taking notes for your exam, you need to memorize these exact steps. They show the inevitable step-by-step logical flow of Anselm's deduction, where existence itself is treated as a defining perfection. He places existence in the exact same category as goodness or wisdom. Think about it. If God is the absolute greatest thing we can think of, but he only exists in our minds, then we could easily think of something greater, right? A God that actually exists in reality. Therefore, to avoid this glaring contradiction, the greatest conceivable being simply must exist in reality. All right, section 3, the painter and the fool. To really grasp this whole concept, we need to look at a super vivid analogy Anselm uses, and also the specific opponent he's arguing against. He actually cites the fool from Psalm 53. This is the atheist who understands the concept of God when they hear it, but absurdly fails to realize the implications of that perfection. Anselm is basically pointing out that even to deny God, you first have to have the concept of God in your understanding. I mean, you can't deny something if you don't even know what it is, right? So here's where Anselm's painter analogy comes in, and it perfectly contrasts in intellectu, meaning in the mind, with in re, which means in reality. It proves that a God who actually exists in reality is infinitely greater than one who merely exists as a thought experiment. Think of a painter. A painter can have a totally brilliant vision for a masterpiece in their head, but we can all agree that the actual finished painting hanging on a gallery wall is far greater than just the unpainted idea. Anselm is essentially saying the fool is treating God like an unpainted picture, entirely missing the point that true perfection actually requires existence. Which brings us to Section 4, Proslogion 3, Necessary Existence. So, Anselm doesn't just stop at the definition. In Chapter 3, he shifts his focus to the actual nature of God's existence. The absolutely crucial point here is aseity, or necessary existence. God is what we call de dicto necessary, meaning, by definition, it is completely impossible for him not to be. So we're moving way beyond just saying God is real here. We're saying God's very nature makes non-existence an absolute impossibility. And this step-by-step logic in Proslogion 3 reveals that it is a hard logical contradiction to claim God doesn't exist, simply because a being with the property of necessary existence cannot fail to exist. Remember our word contingent from the toolkit earlier? Anselm points out that contingent beings, things that come in and out of existence, are inherently inferior to something that must always exist. If you can imagine God just popping out of existence, well, you aren't imagining the greatest possible being. A truly supreme being literally cannot be thought of as not existing. And finally, Section 5, the perfect island objection. Okay, let's see how all of this builds into the critical evaluation phase for your exam. Because, of course, Anselm's 11th century peers didn't just accept this argument without a fight. His contemporary, the monk Ganilo, argued in his book In Behalf of the Fool that Anselm's logic was deeply flawed. Ganilo, who, by the way, was actually a firm believer in God himself, thought Anselm's method was totally broken. He basically said, look, I can imagine the most perfect, lush, incredible island in my mind. Since an island existing in reality is better than one in my mind, boom, by your logic, that perfect island must exist somewhere out in the ocean. But Anselm's rebuttal, and this is essential to remember for your exam, cleanly dismantles this. He points out that an island is contingent and impossible to perfectly define, whereas God is the singular, necessary being. Anselm fires back that you simply cannot compare the creator to a piece of land. An island relies on the ocean and the earth, right? It's fundamentally contingent. Plus, how do you even define a perfect island anyway? If I add one more palm tree or maybe one more grain of golden sand, does it become more perfect? It's completely subjective. God's perfection, on the other hand, is absolute and self-reliant. Anselm's argument only works for a necessary being, not contingent objects like islands. As you finish up your exam prep, I want you to ponder this profound question from the philosopher Bertrand Russell. It really captures why Anselm's puzzle remains one of the most fascinating deductions in all of human thought. Is it actually possible to define something into existence just by thinking about it correctly? Whether you're fully convinced by Anselm's a priori logic or you side with critics like Ganilo, there's just no denying that this 11th century monk forced us to deeply examine the very nature of existence itself. So good luck on your exams, keep studying those definitions, and as always, keep questioning everything.